A big mistake that I see a lot of founders making is thinking that more products, more options, more choices is going to fix their top line. And that's very, very rarely the case. And the conversation I'm having more often with founders is like, no, you don't need more SKUs or variants. You just need to get better at selling the ones that you already have, because we've already invested time and effort into developing these things. If you add, more options and choices, you're just going to give customers decision-making fatigue. And when you overwhelm customers with this cognitive load by giving them more choices and options, they often actually become less likely to make a purchase than more likely. And so you can actually hurt your conversion rate by giving too many choices to online shoppers.
You're listening to Ecom Finance Experts by Finaloop, where we dive into e-commerce finance best practices with the sharpest minds in the game. We're joined here today with Nate Littlewood, founder of Future Ready CFO. Nate, how's it going?
Pretty good, Jacob. How are you? Thank you for having me on here.
Yeah, it's great to be speaking. We've worked together in the past. Nate has a lot of really great content in this space in general, which I highly recommend you guys all check out. Now we're going to dive in today, kind of just to give everything a bit of a structure, where Nate provides fractional CFO services to brands in the ecom space. So we're kind of going to try to get into the CFO's head, how they analyze financials, what are big line items that pop up, and how you should be thinking about your company in this kind of way. So let's just dive straight in, Nate. Why do you think financial health is such an uncomfortable topic for founders to discuss and dive into?
Yeah, really good question. I think that the financial statements for companies and, looking at the numbers and metrics often tell people a story that they don't really want to hear. There's often parts of these financial statements that, indicate there's problems with your business and things aren't working, as efficiently or as well as they should. I find personally that a lot of founders, particularly, those that are in like the 6 to 7, figure type range, they're very passionate about their problem. They've got a very clear sense of the mission that they're all about and, the sort of customer that they're looking to serve. But sometimes when you get into the numbers, you can uncover a bit of a conflict there, because sometimes these numbers will tell us that parts of the business are just not working as well as they should. And a lot of founders, don't enjoy kind of facing up to that reality. And it can be an uncomfortable and awkward thing to do, to have to, look at that and, go through the process of introspecting and figuring out what's wrong. So it's, I totally understand that it's an uncomfortable, area for people to be spending time. I would have to confess that, when I was a founder myself, I was even guilty of this, just, parts of the business, certain numbers that I knew were a mess and that I didn't want to have to face. It's easy to ignore them. And then, just get on with your day and, feel good about whatever else you're doing. But, I think, it's an important discipline to get into. And a big part of what I'm doing these days as a CFO, obviously.
Right. And do you think the average founder understands the numbers, but is kind of just pushing it off and doesn't want to get involved, or the complexity of the numbers in of itself is kind of a barrier for diving in and understanding them?
Yeah, certainly the complexity is an obstacle. Amongst the folks that I interact with, I would say most of them have a pretty good handle on how their business is generating revenue, or the top line, right? That's number of units sold, it's pricing, that's pretty straightforward. What tends to happen though is once a month, these founders will have a relationship with a bookkeeper or accountant. Maybe they're lucky enough to be using Finaloop. And once a month or so, they'll get a tap on the shoulder and they basically get a scorecard, right? And that scorecard is, hey, here was your profit or loss, or here was the cash flow that you generated. And there's this whole world of kind of stuff that happens in between those points that most founders don't really have a great handle on, right? There's a whole lot of ratios, there's a whole lot of metrics, there's some terminology, there's some jargon, stuff that, is quite confusing at times. And it can often be, a little bit of a black box to really figure out like exactly where is all this revenue going and why isn't enough of it kind of landing in my bank account at the end of each month, So that's certainly an area that I spend a bit of time on. As far as like the financial literacy of founders and their willingness to approach the topic of numbers, I tend to categorize founders into 3 different categories and groups. The first group is the kind of maker, designer, creative founder. They're usually a little bit more artistic. They tend to, to varying degrees, have a bit of an allergy to numbers, right? These tend to be people who say, I don't understand this. I don't really want to understand it. Just, take my money and make this finance accounting problem go away from me so that I can focus on, the product stuff, which is what I enjoy to do. Candidly, they're really difficult people for me to work with as a CFO because I find it is often hard to kind of, keep their attention and keep them engaged in topics about, finance and numbers. The second type of founder is kind of the paid media gurus, right? So they understand the Meta and the Google game. They understand PPC. They understand CAC. They understand LTV. And as long as they can build up a set of marketing related numbers that work for them and their business and their cost structure, those folks tend to be happy to just have a bookkeeper or an accountant kind of follow them around and basically clean up their mess. For those sorts of founders, I find that it's usually very clear where they're going to get their next, batch of cash from, revenue. And when they receive that revenue and generate profit from it, it's usually pretty clear what they're going to do with that profit, right? They're going to invest in more inventory and more ads. And so those businesses don't have a whole lot of choices to make in terms of how they source and allocate capital. And so again, like I have done a bit of work with these folks, but there are certain types of businesses where, you do have a very, very simple list of options about capital sourcing and capital allocation that there's candidly not that much as fractional CFO can do to help them, right? If they are that, straightforward. The third type of founder, and I would put most, if not all of my retainer clients in this category, is the folks who tend to be a little bit older. Most of the clients I work with are not in their 20s. They tend to be 30s, 40s, even 50s. They've been around the block once or twice. They have been running their business long enough to understand that there is a poor correlation between the time and effort that they're investing and the financial rewards that they're getting out. So they know what they're putting in, they know the countless hours, they know how much stress and blood, sweat, and tears this business is costing them, but they're just not generating the financial outcomes that they wanted. The important thing about this third type of founder is I find that they tend to be much more willing and interested in learning. And, I really need to have, to be able to do my job and to be effective, I really need to be working with founders who have that openness, that interest, and they want to understand these things. So yeah, I think I guess the point is you can't really generalize. There's lots of different types of founders in this space, and the way that we work with all of them is a little bit different.
Right. So I guess the third group that you said most of your retainer clients have fallen there, people that have experience, have been around the block, and know that they need these financial insights. When do they usually reach out to you? At what stage would of their revenue growth?
Yep. So most of the folks I deal with are in the $2-3 million and upwards. My clients kind of drift into like the early, say, 8 figures in terms of size. Usually there is some type of catalyst involved in their voyage that prompts them to come looking for someone like me. So that could be, they're frustrated with their media growth and, their paid media strategy is not giving them the returns they want. And they don't really understand the numbers well enough to, be able to figure out and understand what's going on. Or it could be that we're approaching the end of the year and they know that they don't have enough money for inventory. And so, okay, we need to go and look for debt financing, like how we're going to figure this out, how much money we're going to need, so on and so forth. There's a few other points throughout the year. I guess, tax and tax time is also a time of year over the next couple of months when a lot of people are going to be looking at their numbers and having conversations with their accountants. So, there usually, in my experience at least, needs to be some sort of catalyst or trigger that, encourages or forces a founder to realize that there's some aspect of the finance and numbers side of part of the business that they don't understand or is not working for them the way they want it to work. And that's often, a point in their voyage where I cross paths with them.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. All right. So now let's say this founder approaches you and knocks on your office door, or probably more likely the Zoom link.
Clicks on my Calendly link. It's 2025, yes, exactly. Jacob. What are you doing?
I'm an accountant. I'm an old school kind of guy. And so you get their financials, you review them, and assuming that they are orderly and you can get a good picture by reviewing them, and you're looking kind of at the top line, sales, up until, let's say, all of my COGS, I'm looking just at the sales portion of the P&L. Yeah. What are general things that you'd look at, or various line items that can be optimized when reviewing these kind of financials?
Okay. So revenue specifically, or you're talking about like revenue, further through the... Okay. All right. So at the revenue line specifically, there's a number of things that we look at, and there's kind of quantity and quality based metrics. So the quantity of revenue is, pretty obvious. That is the number of, dollars and cents that we have. And what I want to look at is, firstly, what is the trend in revenue growth? Are we increasing revenue? That's usually a pretty good indicator of a business that has, proven product market fit. They're solving a real problem. More customers want their product this year than there were last year. It's potentially also a good indicator of a business that is gaining market share, right? Maybe they're actually taking volume away from some of their competitors or peers, which is a good thing. If they've got a better product or service, they should do that over time. So, first up, I'm going to start with an analysis just of the quantity of revenue, right? But where the revenue line gets really interesting is when you start peeling back the layers and looking at and thinking about the quality of the revenue. And there's a whole host of different things we can look at there. So one topic is like diversification. So I want to understand where, what channels are we getting revenue from? How diversified are those channels? If it's a, ecom only business, this could mean, are you selling on Amazon? Are you selling through Faire? Are you selling through Shopify? Like, what does that mix of channels look like? But probably more importantly, I also want to understand where the traffic's coming from, right? I was mentioning to you earlier that I had some interactions last year with a company that was doing, I can't remember the number. It was like, I want to say 80% of their revenue is coming through TikTok. And, I'm not on TikTok and I haven't frankly been keeping up with all of the bans and so forth. But, needless to say, there is risk when you have a very, very high level of channel concentration. Meta or Google could change the algorithm. PPC could become unaffordable. Some customer acquisition channels could be, totally shut down. Another good example
when
is
the administration is so unpredictable. It's another risk.
Yeah, exactly. And AI as another example is going to be having a very big impact on things like SEO. So I really want to understand what is the traffic diversification and what does that look like? Do we have any potential risks or threats there? The next thing that I want to look at is a split between new and returning. So you can get this data natively from Shopify. There's also plugins that allow you to see this quite nicely. But what I really want to see is how many of the people coming into your ecosystem are new customers versus coming back. And I want to understand, like, what is the repeat purchase behavior of these people, and how does that compare to your industry at large? So we need to understand the product category. Obviously, like high price point electronics are going to have a very different repeat purchase behavior to, food and bev, for example. So for your industry or category, are you doing better or worse when it comes to repeat purchase behavior? That often tells me a lot about the product quality. I would say, 90% of the time, if there's a problem with repeat purchase behavior, it gives me a hint that there's probably some sort of product problem here, okay? Something about the product is not encouraging people to come back in large quantities. And if you have a low repeat purchase behavior, that obviously has an impact to things like LTV, and that can have, flow-on impacts to how efficiently your paid media engine is ultimately going to work. I was actually...
Your CAC is... You're getting that first order, right? Meaning your initial CAC is working, but then as you have a product issue, so the recurring is not working the way it should be. That's what you're saying.
Exactly. So I was actually doing some work last year with a founder through the accelerator program that I mentor at. She was in the food and bev category, and she only had like a 10% repeat purchase rate off a first order AOV of like $45, right? So the LTV on a revenue basis here was, low 50s. And, she had, reasonable sort of gross margins, but, you're only making lifetime gross profit there of like, $20, $25 or something. And it's very, very difficult to build a, paid media business when your lifetime gross profit is that low. So I want to understand, how much profit we're going to be getting from each of these customers over time. And that's, new versus returning is super important to look at there. Another metric that I would look at is things like revenue per SKU. So when you kind of think about these businesses, like they are machines or entities that ideate, design, source, build, manufacture, and sell products, right? Every product or SKU that we put out has got a time associated with all of the engineering and design work that has to go into, manufacturing it and sourcing it, right? So I want to understand, like, how efficiently is this business actually doing that? And revenue per SKU is a really, really good scorecard for that. Over the last year, I've encountered businesses that are doing revenue per SKU as low as like $3,000 a year. I've also encountered other businesses that are doing about $8 million per year per SKU. And so they're drastically different companies in terms of like how efficiently they are bringing product into market, right? A big mistake that I see a lot of founders making is thinking that more products, more options, more choices is going to fix their top line. And that's very, very rarely the case. And the conversation I'm having more often with founders is like, no, you don't need more SKUs or variants. You just need to get better at selling the ones that you already have, because we've already invested time and effort into developing these things. If you add more options and choices, you're just going to give customers decision-making fatigue. And when you overwhelm customers with this cognitive load by giving them more choices and options, they often actually become less likely to make a purchase than more likely. And so you can actually hurt your conversion rate by giving too many choices to online shoppers. Wow. So, I want to look at revenue.
The paradox of choice and defocusing.
Exactly.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because I've said this in the past as well, is kind of one general piece of advice I generally have is to think like an investor. And a lot of times when private equity groups get involved, and they do buy out these companies at a certain price, and they try to 4x or whatever within a couple of years, one of the things they do is to have less SKUs which are more profitable because, as we said, it's defocusing and you can end up cross-financing a lot of the time and then just driving your business down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Some of the other things that we could dive into at the revenue line is looking at things like the product lifecycle. And this was something that we thought a lot about with my own business, which had pretty significant Amazon sales, right? So we came to realize after a little while that, you know, we were innovating, we were designing, we were bringing these new products to market, but there's this very, very pronounced life cycle effect, especially on marketplaces like Amazon. What happens after 2 or 3 years, if, you know, the Amazon world notices that you've got a profitable product and you're doing pretty well, is they'll mimic it, right? There'll be other people coming in and white labeling, knocking off your design. We had people who were literally, you know, infringing some of our patents, but like, you know, Amazon didn't really care. And so what happened is that, you know, we started to need to factor in that some of these products, we were really only going to be profitable on them for like 2 or 3 years before, you know, all the lookalikes and knockoffs came on and we, you know, lost the competitive edge. So I guess this goes back to, you know, our previous point, thinking about revenue per SKU. I want to understand like what is the life cycle of some of these products. And the final point, I guess, is whether you are a kind of top of funnel business or a bottom of funnel business. So a top of funnel business is really engaged in demand creation. They're more likely to be more focused on Meta as a platform. A bottom of funnel business is, you know, a demand capture business. They're not really creating demand. They're just trying to be the best version of whatever it is the customer's looking for. And they're more likely to be advertising on Google and selling on Amazon. So if we are a bottom of funnel demand capture business, then I'm going to want to look at like the competitive landscape. What do the alternatives look like? Yes, you might be winning market share today, but how defensible is that? Is there a possibility that someone else will come and capture more demand than you later? Versus a top of funnel business, a demand creation business, usually a lot more scalable because you're kind of not constrained by the size of the current market and you actually have the ability to expand it, which is always a good thing.
Right. More differentiated.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay. Overall, really great insights on the revenue side. Now, I write a lot of content and I've been writing about tariffs, and every day I have to go back onto our website and edit because there's a new thing. So it makes it very, very complex to kind of keep on top of all of the regulatory and the trade changes. But how do your customers kind of look at this, and how are they trying to plan going into 2025 and all this uncertainty when there can be so many changes to all trade law, which can obviously impact so many places within your P&L?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess the first thing that you need to understand is whether you're likely to be a beneficiary of tariffs or whether you're likely to be on the opposite side of the fence. And, you know, I have interacted with businesses in both situations, right? So you're going to be a beneficiary if you have a domestically focused supply chain and you're using mainly, you know, US suppliers and manufacturers, and you're competing against alternatives that are largely imported. So obviously those imports are about to, or maybe they already have, gotten more expensive as the tariffs are coming in. So if you're in that situation, then I'd be doing a few things. Number one, I would be anticipating that some of your competition may be exiting the market at some point. There could be new market share opportunities emerging for you. So I would be going around and talking to my supply chain partners and saying, hey, heads up, there's a chance we might be actually needing to capitalize on this opportunity. Maybe we can actually produce a bit more. Just, you know, let's have a conversation about what that looks like and what it's going to take to ramp things up when and if the time comes, because that could be around the corner. The other thing I would do is look to solidify some of my supply chain relationships. So some of these competitors of yours who are currently relying on imports, If they've got a business already set up and they're at risk of being shut out of the market due to tariffs, what are they going to do? They're going to be looking around, probably talking to your supplier, and trying to find domestic alternatives to their currently imported components or materials or whatever it is they're using. So anticipate that some of your competition could be coming into competition with you from a supply chain perspective. So it would be a good time to look at your contracts, look at the agreements, and anticipate that there could be some competitors kind of sniffing around. Now, there's obviously a whole bunch of businesses that are on the opposite side, and they're likely to be hurt by this. And I guess the temptation, if you can see that you're in this category and you can see that tariffs are coming, there is very likely that there is a temptation here to stockpile, right? You know that tariffs are coming. Let's place a gigantic purchase order now, beat the tariffs, and then we'll have a whole lot of inventory to work through. Honestly, Jacob, I think that's a terrible idea. I understand the temptation, but it's really only a Band-Aid solution. It doesn't fix the core underlying problem here. It exposes your business to a significant amount of risk, right? You've now got financing risk, you've got warehouse risk, you've got product obsolescence risk. There's a whole lot of ways that this could go wrong. And it doesn't really, it buys you a little bit of time, I guess, but it doesn't really fix the core underlying issue, which is that you need to rethink your supply chain and figure out a way to bring your costs down or remain competitive, whatever that looks like. So what I would rather see founders do in that situation is invest that time and effort into supply chain redesign and rethinking how they're going to put this product together. So yeah, the strategy very much depends on where you're at and which side of the coin you're landing.
It's a really thoughtful answer. Most people that I've been discussing with this with kind of just think about the people manufacturing abroad side. It's a good point. Kind of, if you are based domestically, then you might actually have an advantage, especially if corporate tax or domestic production ends up going down, like Trump was talking about in the past. You can really be in a much stronger position than in your competition.
Yeah,
it's interesting. All right, Nate, we were having this discussion before. You had a great doctor analogy about finances, and as someone who comes from the previous space of life expectancy and kind of diving into medical records, I thought it was really interesting. You want to kind of share that with us?
Yeah, sure. So this is speaking your language, I guess, as a medical guy. Yeah. So I live in Brooklyn, and I take my dog to Prospect Park every morning. And a couple of days ago, I was chatting with an elderly friend, guy who's in his early 60s. And he had recently been to the doctor and gotten a bit of a medical scare. There's some issues with his heart. And as a result, he's now looking at and thinking about a whole lot of dietary changes and exercise changes and, just changing the way he lives his life. Anyway, we're chatting about this, and he told me about this friend of his who he's known since high school or something. And she has apparently not been to the doctor for 20 years or something. She just doesn't like hearing about what's wrong with her. And I guess, her thought process is that if I don't know, then I can't worry about it, right? And I can just, ignorance is bliss. And as I sat there, chatting with my friend, I kind of had this, oh my God, that's exactly like what founders do. Some of them are willing to go to the doctor, i.e. the fractional CFO, and have a conversation with their business, understand what's wrong with them, and talk about how we can change behavior in order to improve their health. But then you also get founders who are just allergic to this, and they don't like to confront what the doctor or CFO has to say. And there's two very, very different populations of people, right? And as I was standing there thinking about this, I was like, you know what? I bet the life expectancy of these two different groups of people is going to be very, very different. And I wondered whether there's an analogy here with startup founders, right? So the folks who are able to face up to these uncomfortable topics, they are able to go to the doctor and receive bad news and have a conversation about what that news means. I'm guessing they're going to be the much more successful group of companies long term. And so, yeah, that's how I connected walking my dog in the park to fractional CFOing.
Got it.
I
I love
clearly
it.
clearly need to get out a little bit more. I think about this stuff way too much.
I love it. I love it. Life expectancy of businesses depends on how often you visit Nate.
Yeah.
Um, that's great. Thank you. All
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Bringing things to a wrap here. If someone wants to find out more about you, or like I mentioned before, your really great educational content, where's the best place to find you, or the best way to reach out?
Yeah, best place is probably LinkedIn. Nate Littlewood is my name on LinkedIn. I'm active there most days. I have to confess I didn't get a post out today, but the day's not over yet, so maybe I'll squeeze one out this afternoon. But yeah, LinkedIn, you can contact me through there or through my website, of course, which is futurereadycfo.com.
And what type of brands are you providing services for?
Yeah, so I specialize in kind of 7 to 8 figure brands in terms of my retainer services. We spoke earlier about the type of founder where I think I add the most value. You know, it generally wants to be folks who are interested in learning and getting some coaching and willing to actually spend some time on the numbers. In terms of the channel exposure, most of my folks are kind of e-commerce skewed. I do work with some brands that do a little bit of retail, but I'm much stronger in the ecom world. And I have a bit of a soft spot for kind of purpose or mission-led brands. You know, I really like working with founders who are pursuing, you know, some greater environmental, health, or social cause. They're kind of, you know, my people. I have a lot of respect for those sort of founders. They're the type of folks who are bold enough to recognize that something about the status quo is broken, and also brave enough to have a go at fixing it. And, you know, my mission is to help support those folks and try to navigate them through the choppy waters of finance and numbers, basically.
Got it. All right. Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for joining, Nate. It's been a pleasure. And take care.
Cool. Thank you for having me, Jacob. Really appreciate it.